Welcome to the SharePoint Patterns and Practices webcast, and this time we're going to talk about something which was part of the SharePoint Framework 1.4 release, a really significant change, which is around including the assets on the SharePoint Framework solution packages. My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a Senior Program Manager from Microsoft and in the SharePoint Engineering, and with me today from the community side is Waldek Mastercard. Hello Waldek, will you do the quick intros as well?
Sure. Hi everybody, my name is Waldek Mastercard. I am Office Development MVP. I work at Rancor, and today we will talk about a new thing released in version 1.4 of the SharePoint Framework, which is support for packaging assets in SharePoint Framework solution packages.
Indeed, indeed. And this is a really, really big change, actually, considering how the SharePoint Framework has worked in the past. So this is a really great improvement for the developers and also for admins. So let's have a look on this one. What does it mean in practice? Looking into this logical architecture, and then we'll do a live demo together with Waldek as well. So now, when we're deploying a SharePoint Framework solution, you always package your solution as an SPPKG file. So you actually create an SPPKG file which contains the solution manifest and details around the solution. And in the past, you were asked to then host the JavaScript files and image assets in a different CDN or a different location. And that was that wasn't really an optimal thing, because there was additional steps to consider. You needed to set up the CDN. Potentially you could use SharePoint, but it wasn't really automatically done for you. As part of the SharePoint Framework 1.4 version and forward, you can now, and this is by default how things are actually done, the solutions and the assets are getting packaged inside of the SPPKG file. So you have one file which has the introduction assets and introduction XML and manifest details, but also the JavaScript files, the bundles and images what the solutions potentially can use. So now when we deploy the SPPKG file to your Office 365 tenant or your SharePoint Online tenant, depending on your Office 365 CDN settings, that files and JavaScript files, which are then used in the pages, are automatically being served either from Office 365 public CDN, if the CDN is enabled. If the CDN is not enabled, we'll dynamically update the URLs pointed directly to the assets in the tenant app catalog site collection. So the whole thing is happening automatically depending on the tenant level settings. So you as a developer, you'll just package your solution and you say, if you don't change the default settings, the assets are getting packaged inside of the SPPKG file. You deploy the solution to your tenants, and depending on tenant administrative settings, your assets are getting served either from the Office 365 CDN or from the application catalog in a tenant level. So quite great capability, because this will reduce the complexity of getting stuff deployed. So you don't have to worry about getting those assets deployed from let's say a third-party CDN or at a different location. All of that is getting automatically by default done for you. Now, just to pinpoint also that if you still want to use, for example, Azure CDN or whatever CDN service, so you would need to have more control, for example, for CDN expiration or CDN configuration, you can absolutely do that in the future as well. So this is a setting in the package solution JSON file, which controls if the assets are getting actually packaged inside of the SPPKG file or not. So why does the asset packaging is a great improvement for SPFX solution? So like mentioned, no additional asset hosting location needed. So everything is getting done automatically for you just by adding that SPPKG file to the app catalog. Organization in control for the solution assets. And this is a good thing as well, because theoretically, if you're using let's say an SPFX solution provided to you by an ISV or a random partner, that solution is referencing assets from a random CDN, random URL in the internet. You as an organization, you don't know if those JavaScripts are getting updated or not. Now that we are actually packaging the JavaScripts inside of the assets files, you actually control the solution assets. So you know exactly where and when these files are getting updated. So that will give you more security and more reliance on what's actually happening within your tenant. And then possibility to promote the same package through dev, UAT, and a prod. So obviously, depending on your ALM process, you might have separate people doing a development. You might have a separate test tenant, potentially, not obviously required, but you might have that. And you might have a production tenant. So using this model that the assets are getting packaged inside of the package, you don't have to worry about the URL in the inside of the SPPKG file because everything is automatically updated for you. So as a developer, you just package everything into the SPPKG file, and the URLs are getting automatically updated based on the environmental settings or the tenant setting. Anything what I'm missing here, Waldek, would come to my question sign?
Yeah, I mean, I am here still, so...
Yes, sorry. Passionate about the new feature. It's a brilliant feature.
Yeah. So the one thing you mentioned is that by default, everything will be packaged inside the package. So would you say that deployment to Azure of assets or to Azure Blob is in a way obsolete and that we should always use that? And I'm aware that I'm here moving on a dangerous ground because it's like basically asking for advice. Would you say should people always do this? Or can you say there are some particular scenarios in which it would make sense to use Azure or your own location to store the assets?
Well, this is once again one of those things that it absolutely depends. So I would say by default, yes, by default, absolutely you should be using this automatic asset packaging. Now, the Office 365 CDN is an automatic CDN which we provide you for free through Office 365. Now, it might be that you have specific requirements for your CDN control. You might have specific configuration requirements, which I can't really invent anything. Maybe you can, Waldek. But you want to control how the CDN is behaved. You can't do that with Office 365 CDN, but you can do that with an Azure CDN. So if you have those requirements, you can still use the Azure option. You can still use to deploy the storage blob, storage account blobs option as a COP task in the future as well. We're not going to remove that. But by default, probably that's not the chosen path. And all of our tutorials, you might have seen that. We updated all of our tutorials to obviously fallback and not fallback, to use this asset packaging as the default guidance as well.
Yeah, and I guess there are still two options. So tutorials that we have, some of them will, or actually we will have one tutorial, or we have one tutorial that shows exactly if you chose to deploy to Azure, this is the way to do it. But by default, as you said, we use the default approach that everybody will see when they create new projects.
Absolutely, yes.
Another thing that I wanted to ask that I wonder about really is, like in the past, before you actually created the package, you had to include the URL where the files would be stored.
Yep.
So how does that work here? Because you said that the URL will be automatically adjusted across environment, but so what do I include in the code? What URL do I set initially, and how does that work?
And this is exactly what everybody who's familiar with SharePoint Framework and the previous packaging model are always asking, that wait, how does that actually work? So
yeah.
what will happen is that if you have the setting in the solution packaging enabled true, which is the default setting, indicating that the assets should be packaged to the solution package, will replace that URL automatically as part of the packaging as a tag. It's I think it's HTTPS client library, the tag name, if I remember that correctly. And it actually doesn't matter. We replace the URL as a dynamic tag, so that whenever the assets are being used in SharePoint actually recognizes, hey, this is actually indicating that its assets are dynamically packaged in the solution, and the URL is getting replaced automatically. So you, as a developer, you don't need to worry about the URL, and because that's getting taken care of by us in the SharePoint side.
Right. So if I understand that correctly, no matter what URL you set it to, when you create the package, it will be replaced by a token, and that token indicates during deployment to SharePoint Online that the assets are included in package, and they should be deployed to the location meant to host the assets in SharePoint. Correct?
Correct. That is correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, so how about we see it in practice?
Yes, let's have a look on this one in practice. So let's actually flip on Waldek's desktop and have a look on the packaging options and how does it flip the URLs automatically when we're getting solutions into use. So Waldek, take it away.
All right. So let's have a look in practice. How does packaging assets inside SharePoint Framework solution packages works? So here I have new project created using the SharePoint Framework version 1.4. As you see here, I have a new flag available named include client-side assets, and that's set to true. And that indicates that whatever assets I have, bundles, images, and all that, will be included inside the package that I generate. Another thing that let's have a look at is the URL. So here in Write Manifest, you can see that I haven't changed the URL. So I just let it be the way it is. So now let me build the project in release mode. So here I will run gulp bundle --ship, right? Because if you would build it in a debug mode, it would just point to localhost. And we actually want to see how it's going to be deployed to SharePoint.
Of course.
So here we have the 3-to-1. There will be the bundle. There it is. It took a bit longer than we thought, and now let's generate the package. So here we're saying gulp package solution --ship, and that should go relatively fast. There you go, it's done. Before we actually add the package to SharePoint, let's have a look at the manifest and URLs, and actually let's see if the assets have been included. So here in our SharePoint solution directory, there is the package, but there's also debug folder in which we can see all files that are actually a part of the package. So if we open that, the one thing that we can see here is that there is a new folder named client-side assets, which is here. And if we open that, we can actually see the strings and the bundle that we have in project, because they're exactly the same as available here in dist, right? Or actually not in dist, in temp deploy. So they are here, and these are exactly the same things that are available here, that are available here. So yes, they're included in package. Now, another interesting thing is, what about the URL? Because initially we didn't set that, right? We left that empty. So what is the URL now? And if I wrap it, here you can see the token that the tooling includes to indicate to SharePoint that these assets are included in package and that SharePoint should deploy them inside SharePoint. So that's a token that does that. So let's see it in practice, how SharePoint will handle the package when we add it to catalog. Let's switch to our site and let's switch to the package. Let's get that. And let me just drag and drop the package to the app catalog. It's being deployed now. Update completed, and now we will see an interesting thing in a dialog if all is well. Now there's an interesting part. In the past, if you recall that, we would see here a URL that shows where the files are stored. But now it says SharePoint Online. It's exactly because of the fact that we chose to include assets inside the package and that we want SharePoint to host them for us. So that's why it says the files will come from your tenant. You host them. So now we choose, let's say, make this available to all sites, deploy that. And that should be done. Let's verify that it has been deployed, no errors. Now let's switch to our sites and let me refresh the page so that it will load the manifest available in the tenant. Let me edit the page and add the web part to the page. Because the package that we've built has a web part, which we can add to the site. So here we look for sales, which is our web part. We add that. And now we can already see that it works, right? So let's quickly configure that so we can see some nice data. Let's choose region Europe. And we can already see that it works, right? And if we publish the page and load developer tools, let me zoom in on that, switch to the network tab, filter on Contoso, which is the name of the web part, and then reload the page. We should be able to see from which URL this web part is being served. So now we see it here, and if you look at the URL, it points to publiccdn.sharepointonline.com. The reason for that is that this tenant has the public CDN enabled, right? And if you recall it, we didn't set this URL ourselves. We only set the token, and SharePoint Framework picked it up on itself, right? It did it by itself. It replaced token with the right URL, based on the fact that CDN is enabled here. If it wasn't, it would use the catalog URL where the package is stored.
No, that's actually
anything you want to ask?
Yeah, just to be super clear, if the CDN is not enabled, like Waldek mentioned, you can actually see what would be the URL. So the URL would be the tenant URL /site/app/client-side assets /that GUID, and also the bundle from here. So if the CDN is enabled, it's going to use the HTTP public CDN URL. If it's not enabled, it's going to pinpoint directly to the bundle directly from the app catalog. So it's completely seamless experience, which is super great.
All right. So with that, how about we switch back to the slides?
Sounds good. Thanks, Waldek. Cool. So thank you, Waldek, for that one. I think we nicely walked through, let's say, the differences between the URLs, and maybe not the most sexiest demo, so to say, but I think this has a massive deal from a simplifying the SharePoint Framework solution, development experience, and also deployment experience. And this has a massive impact also from hosting experience perspective. So the tenant admins, or the persons who've been delegated the permissions to manage the app catalog, don't have to worry about the second dimension, where do I actually host the assets? And also considering the fact that quite often, if you think about the Azure CDN host, and quite often in enterprises, the Azure is being managed by different people than the Office 365 people. So this way, you don't have to worry about that asset hosting in the Azure side. You can just concentrate on making sure that your solution is getting deployed. You're based on settings and tenant admin controlled settings. Everything is dynamically happening. Anything? Yes.
Yeah, sure. To sum it up, it's all about simplicity. It's simplicity in your deployment, in your ALM, and the fact that you have one thing less to worry, like who's managing the assets. It's you, Absolutely. Period. Absolutely. You determine when they change. So it's a big changer in the whole game of SPFX deployment and all of that. It really simplifies things a lot. Absolutely.
That's great. I think if you're not super familiar with SharePoint Framework until seeing this video, you probably don't even understand the meaningless of the magnitude of this change. I think this will have a significant impact, like Waldek said, on the simplicity of getting things done, which is superb. So cool, but I think that's it for this one. So thank you, Waldek, for the great demo. Thank you, Waldek, for the great discussion, and we'll come up with a new webcast sooner or later. Thank you.
Bye.